Let's wrap up Summer League play with some more analysis with Caitlin Cooper, the best in the biz, breaking all this stuff down. We go in deep on Jarace Walker, Johnny Furphy, Kendall Brown, everybody who mattered and played a lot in Summer League, the good, the bad, everything in between, all on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we're talking all things Summer League, breaking down the games Jarace Walker, Johnny Furphy, and company showed us out in Vegas. The good, the bad, the really not good, the really great from some guys. We get into everybody. Jarace Walker, Johnny Furphy, Ben Sheppard, Enrique Freeman, Tristan Newton, Quenton Jackson, Tshiebwe, and Kendall Brown in full detail. Caitlin Cooper from Basketball She Wrote is going to join us to make this episode sing. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Before we get started, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs are done. The sports stop swirling like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. There's some for everybody all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, let's talk some Summer League with Caitlin Cooper from Basketball She Wrote. Summer League has come. Summer League has gone. It is mercifully over for a Pacers team that had a lot of turnovers and some inconsistency on defense and had some guys show some awesome progress and some guys not. And it's time to analyze all of them who matter or in the Pacers orbit is the word I usually use to describe them for Summer League. Caitlin, how much does it matter? Oh my gosh, I'm jumping all over the place. Joining me to do that today, a person who frequently talks about Summer League with me because very few people actually watch all 5 Summer League games. It's Caitlin Cooper from Basketball She Wrote. Caitlin, it's the most important thing. They went 1-4. Does it matter at all? No. What was your favorite part of this year's Summer League?
My favorite part of this year's Summer League. That's a tough one because in the past, like you could kind of look at Summer League in addition to what you're watching from individual strides from players for broader concepts that the Pacers might implement. And that even applied to last summer because that provided like an early peek into changes that I anticipated they would make on the defensive end, which they did. This year, I don't know that we necessarily got a glimpse into anything that's going to parlay over to the bigger team. And in a way, that's kind of the trend. My big, broad takeaway from this was that most of the players that were playing there looked like they belonged at Summer League. And I hope that isn't taken in a completely derogatory way because that doesn't have to be a bad thing. The Pacers are very deep on rotation players. There weren't going to be a lot of rotation minutes available to begin with. And when you take somebody like Johnny Furphy, who's only 19 years old, and you don't have a place for them to play, it's okay that they look like they belonged at Summer League. But I would say that of the players we're going to talk to today, I think that all of them looked like they belonged there. So
I like games with NBA players and no consequence. It just becomes fun for me every year because the results don't matter. You're looking for micro stuff. And that's what we're talking about today. And that is where we will go to first with the most interesting player to most for this Summer League experience, and that's Jarace Walker. In year 2 of Summer League for him, we heard Rick Carlisle talking before Summer League for a long time about physicality and hitting people first on both ends of the floor and conditioning and working through the Jim Boylan offseason regiment that's like a football training camp and really helped Isaiah Jackson and Jalen Smith, and how that's kind of some of the stuff that Rick's going to be looking for from Jarace. In Summer League, we heard General Pargo echo similar things. Chad Buchanan said during the Wolves game that this is a big week for Jarace. He's got a season in front of him, and some stuff went pretty well, and some of the stuff on the rubrics that we heard from the team did not go so well. So I will just give you the lob. What'd you think of Jarace Walker's Summer League?
Broad strokes, I think he was pressed into doing too much, and on the defensive end probably didn't show quite enough that they were probably hoping for. I will say on the physicality standpoint, he did transfer a lot of the shots. Like in the G League level, it was almost even that he took almost as many runners as he did shots at the rim. When he was a freshman at Houston, I think he did take one more runner than shot at the rim. At Summer League, he took 16 shots at the rim compared to only 2 runners. So he was making a concerted effort to get more attempts, as was the construction of the offense to get him attempts closer to the basket at times. That being said, he did not finish well at the rim. And it's like you and I were talking about before the top, like his very first shot attempt. You really want to see him gather, use a bump, and then get his own access to the rim rather than you're taking off too far from the basket and then you're fading a little bit by the contact. So he was closer vicinity to the basket when he was taking the attempts. He didn't always stay in that vicinity. And I think the most telling thing, I made like an extended video about it. The Pacers have been running this play since preseason last year. They call it through, like just to provide people with like a quick visual. Imagine the ball handler throwing it to a player at the wing. They cut through, circle around to the opposite corner, come through a handoff into a pin down. Then they get the ball back for a potential second side option. And then they reverse it right back to that same wing, which means Jarace Walker would have the ball at the top of the key. During the regular season and preseason, he then would have got a step-up screen. In this situation, he was consistently getting a ghost screen at the top of the key, and that's reflective of the fact that this roster had not a lot of ball handling. Tight spaces weren't necessarily their friend, but also what they were asking of him. He's then having to create and, hope that his handle gets him somewhere. And then in the one possession that I showed in the video, his handle didn't necessarily get him anywhere. And then he went down to the post on the left block, and it ended up being a hook shot that was like probably an 8-foot hook shot where you would have wanted it to be like, closer, maintaining access to the rim. So I think kind of that speaks overall, those metrics, those numbers, that particular clip kind of speaks to where Jarace finds himself at with some of the things they were asking him to do, which I don't think he will necessarily be asked to do if he were to get minutes with the Pacers.
Yeah, look, like if I zoom as far out as possible to bounce off of what you said, he made 46% of his threes, and we talked about in his season review that like he did show progress with that in the G League, taking off the dribble jumpers. Like that was still good in there at a pretty good volume. He made 40% of his twos. He went 12 for 30 inside the arc in Summer League. So his 3-point percentage is higher than his field goal percentage out there. And I think that kind of speaks to everything you just said, where once that physicality and contact was there, it was like making it a harder shot than it needed to be. You're not trying to draw contact and actually get to the foul line. 4.8 free throw attempts per game is pretty good. Tristan Newton had more than that, though. Like you'd expect a little bit more than that for a guy hunting physicality in particular. And then to bounce off of that, defensively, I felt like he was fine, a little better than fine, but there was always one or two possessions every game where he just got beat like way too easily. And so I don't want to focus too much on those possessions, but I can't give him a straight A for his defense. So like a lot of the stuff that he was asked to do or expected to do. And I thought it was noteworthy. He mentioned this after his first game. Like he played 35 minutes against Brooklyn. He hadn't played 35 minutes in 15 months, right? Probably more than that, maybe some G League games he got there. So that was like very significant for him from a conditioning perspective, but it wasn't always the full game of the full physicality parts. The stuff the coaching staff wanted to see was good, I think, but not quite all the way there. But there were some clear moments, especially with the rim finishing, especially on defense, where it wasn't always there, but the shooting was good. Some nice passing moments, I would say, even though the turnovers were a little crazy. I would say more encouraged than discouraged, even though it wasn't perfect all the time.
The shot has made significant progress from this time last year. He had a hitch in the shot at preseason. That might have been somewhat connected to the elbow, and then he was drifting to the left. That corrected pretty soon into the G League. The numbers look better there, and it's very good that it carried over here. I think that if you're looking at him potentially playing the 3, which as you and I talked about in the player reviews, if he's going to play, it's going to have to be at the 3.
Yep. That
provides you more encouragement. That being said, like we saw him going when Ben Sheppard was no longer playing, he was starting at the 2 guard. In a lot of games, he was practically it was point Jarace at times because they needed more handling and initiation. What he was doing out of the pick and roll, especially late in the game against, I believe, Denver. Was it Denver or Phoenix when he had 3 turnovers in like the last 2 minutes? I don't remember which. But he was having quite a bit of problems reading the help. Like reading the dig down and making the correct play there, reading the tag, the low man. I don't think you want him doing that much initiation at the point of attack. And then also, like what we said, in the post, in the first game against Brooklyn, it looked better because Oscar, to his credit, added some fun facilitation out of the elbows. And he was throwing good passes to Jarace where it just had to be a seal. Didn't necessarily have to be a post move, which was helpful. On the defensive end, I probably disagree with you a little bit because I think too much of the defense is still tied to his hands. And his hands are very good. Like he's very capable with between the hands and the wingspan. He can reach around and poke for a steal. But if you don't get the poke, then you're just letting the ball handler go right past. Yeah. And then some of the things they're mentioning as far as like hard play, the conditioning, not necessarily the gambling to this point, like what they had mentioned earlier in the year. I don't think you can really have any of those types of lapses if you're on the outside looking in of the rotation. And there were times, like, as you said, he played 35 minutes against Brooklyn where, everybody else is back. He's not back yet. And then he's rushing into a gap and lunging past it instead of being able to stay with the group. There was so much, like the game against Minnesota when he wanted to be guarding Rob Dillingham, like he basically motioned, like, I'm going to take him instead of Ben Sheppard. And then there's like possessions where he's getting absolutely creamed by a screen and then he's walking into a pull-up three within the first 3 seconds of the shot clock. Like I highly doubt that that's like what the Pacers were wanting to see if they're trying to make a decision between, Jarace and Ben and who's going to get those backup minutes. I think expecting him to slide against guards is probably still a little bit much based on what I saw here and when he was guarding the pick and roll ball handler. I think ideally you probably do want him guarding wings. I was going to be very intrigued because there were a few spots in these games where he and Kendall Brown were the front court when Oscar and Enrique were both off the floor. And they were letting Jarace play some defensively at the 5, which gave us a little bit of glimpse of what he could potentially do there. But it was very sparing minutes. So I think that the main thing that they were looking for, which was going to be at the defensive end of the floor, we know what he can do now with the shot. We know what he can do as a connective passer, which is where his talent there really shines the most. I'm not sure that he necessarily did enough quite yet to think that, like, as far as broad scale, what the Pacers need, which is a Jarace-sized hole at the defensive end, that he's necessarily completely ready to fill that quite yet.
Funnily enough, the study case for him defensively might be Ben Sheppard, a guy who just goes 1,000% all the time. And I was just reading something from a sports scientist, nutritionist for a team in a Twitter thread that was like, sometimes training athletes on conditioning isn't always just be in better shape. It's be a faster player. Like if every player is a 7 out of 10 speed, right, you have to all exert the same effort to hit that speed. If you're an 8.5 out of 10 speed, it takes you less effort to run at a 7 out of 10 speed and like do all these things. So it's almost like he needs to be faster if he's going to give the amount of effort that he does. Otherwise, he needs to play like Ben Sheppard did last year and just fight like hell over every screen and battle and be involved more on that end of the floor because it isn't always there. And it is a lot of, like, he was a better defensive playmaker last summer league than he was this year. So I don't know what to make of him on that end of the floor. I didn't ask you to do this, but now I'm going to, unless you don't want to. Would you like to give him a grade for his 4 summer league performances?
I would not.
Like, we will not do grades.
I will say, I just felt like there was too much of the time where there had to be an impetus. I don't think it should take, like, I gave up a really easy take in transition. Now we've called a timeout, and now out of the timeout, I'm picking up full court. And the attempts to pick up full court, then it was a little bit more about his footwork, but it was still giving up penetration and what was coming from that. So this team, Tony, still very committed to the full court pressure, to the point where Oscar Tshiebwe was picking up full court at times when the center was bringing the ball up the floor.
And it went okay. All right, Oscar. Mobile man. We'll get to him. Any other thoughts on Jarace?
Wink, wink.
Any other thoughts on Jarace before we move on to a draft pick?
No, I think that we got pretty much everything there.
Yeah. I guess we could do Ben Sheppard first before we get to a draft pick. Let's stick with the roster guys. The guy who Sheppard, in theory, would be the guy that Jarace would take minutes from if he was going to leap into the rotation, given what they've said about him playing the 3. My take the whole time was Ben Sheppard does not need to be in the summer league. His game is not at all a summer league kind of thing. It's interesting because last year we didn't know what he was. And so he was just like off ball, catch and shoot, fight on defense guy. And it was like, cool. And this year we knew he could do all that stuff, but he wanted to, and he should have wanted to try to expand that a little bit, like get into the paint some for some creation, show some passing. And like he did that at Belmont. That's college, but he did it at Belmont some. Like he felt like he could do it. I didn't feel like he was particularly awesome at that. Like he really struggled finishing in the first game. He did not like that part of how he played. He had a couple yucky turnovers and finishes around the basket, but he also in the first half of the first game was like blowing up everything defensively. Like the first 3 possessions, he was everywhere on that end. So he did not finish plays well at all, including threes in his 2 games, but I kind of don't care. I kind of know what Ben Sheppard is and didn't expect him to look awesome in summer league.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see Ben Sheppard is I view him very similarly to, you hope that Ben Sheppard can be somebody like Danny Green for you in the playoffs. And Danny Green was usually like, if he took 1 or 2 dribbles, you're kind of gripping your seat. And that's kind of the case with Ben to a degree on the finishing, as you mentioned, 1 of 6 at the rim. I think that there's a lot of times where he is not a very explosive person. He's a very good cutter. He knows when and where to cut. He won't often take a shot out of a cut. He'll typically continue the advantage and keep the ball moving. And in part, that's him being self-aware because he's often not explosive enough to finish the shot on the cut. And there were times in these games where he was taking off too far from the basket, which was complicating that further. So, yeah, I mean, the rim finishing wasn't great. As you mentioned, 2 of 7 on catch and shoot threes. Fun stat for you. He took a total of 8 threes. How many of those threes do you think were preceded by a paint touch? Oh. As in the ball handler got 2 feet in the paint before they sprayed the ball out to him?
Well, he 1 or 2, probably not very many.
3 total. Okay. And he went 2 of 3 on those threes. So when there was an advantage and you're getting, paint to great threes, he shot the ball well on those. He was not shooting the ball well when it's just like the ball staying above the break. He's standing there, and now maybe he has to create some degree of space, or there isn't space, and he's just shooting a guarded 3. So when you think about him in that context, and to some extent this applies to Jarace as well, because the play that I mentioned called through, Jarace wouldn't even be in that role if he was playing with the regular Pacers. When you're imagining Ben playing off of Tyrese, playing off of TJ, playing off of Andrew, it's a lot more likely he's going to be getting the paint to great threes than what we saw here. So I would expect that, or at least maybe crossing my fingers, that he's going to shoot the ball better than he did last season during the regular season and during what we just saw in summer league. He did get frisky once and put the ball on the floor and went into a pull-up midi 2 in the paint. He did not make it, but he did spin to his left. But I agree with you. I don't think we were going to learn anything about Ben Sheppard in this process because of those things. He needs to be a player who plays off the advantages created by others. There weren't enough players creating advantages. And then, like you said, the first game against Brooklyn, the very first possession, he cut off the same driver twice and ended up getting a deflection. We know what he can do defensively across different positions and what he especially can do at the point of attack. So I don't think he had much to prove there, and I don't think that he did anything to dissuade me from thinking that he could be a rotation player next season for the Pacers.
The best things he did, were show Johnny Furphy what an NBA wing looks like and compete for Enrique Freeman to be the smiliest NBA player of all time. They are going to have some heated battles this year. It is tough for them. I don't have anything else to add on Ben Sheppard unless you
I don't either.
Hey guys, quick little break here so we can talk about the lovely people over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has every single thing you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, plenty more. Whether you are into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Speaking of Johnny Furphy, a.k.a. Baby Lowry Marketing, Caitlin, you have to refer to him as such for the rest of this. His stats do a terrible job of to me, telling you how he played. Because if you just look at his summer league performance, he shot 28% from 3. Like, he did not finish plays particularly well, and yet the volume to me was very encouraging. 9 per game from deep was impressive. He has great hands-on rebounds. He gets his hands on him and pulls them in. He was pretty mobile defensively. The first game was really rough defensively, but got better as summer league went on. I totally understand what the outline of Johnny Furphy is going into year 1 because of his summer league. That's kind of my key takeaway with him.
He definitely fits the way that the Pacers play. He'll be another player that builds out their strengths. As you mentioned, 5 of 22 on spot-up threes. You want to take a guess at where 4 of the 5 makes were located?
Left corner.
The corners.
Yeah,
I mean, you could tell that at Kansas. I didn't like fully hand track it, but when I was looking through his film there, when I did my initial impressions piece, it's like, oh, he's mainly a standstill shooter in the corners. He didn't take a lot of threes from NBA range depth from above the break. He did have the really impressive make there at Summer League where he did the right to left cross and then stepped back to his left where there was actual like self-creation dribble three, because I think like 83 of his 84 spot-up attempts at Kansas were without a dribble. So that was good to see. But, I mean, he's kind of similar to Ben, right? In that he's also a player who's going to need to play off the advantages created by others. And it was just so rare. Like the one time when Tristan Newton pushed the ball downhill out of pistol and that activated Johnny Furphy to cut as the 45 cutter on that kill cut. It's like, oh, Furphy, unlike Ben, is an explosive cutter. He can definitely leap off of 2 feet. He has the athleticism. But there was nobody to trigger those types of actions most of the time. So we didn't get to see it a lot. The lob set that he ran with Tristan Newton, that went off without a hitch a couple times. So it's good for the Pacers to have players who, like, Furphy's not going to do it now, but if you can be a player that, you know, Obi Toppin, 100 dunks, 100 made threes, that fits the way that the Pacers play. And like I said, I think it's fine that he looked like he belonged at Summer League. He's only 19 years old. I think physicality wise, some of that showed up. The Pacers were doing a lot of switching with him. The opposing teams weren't necessarily taking advantage of it because he was definitely giving up physicality on the back side of the switches. He was getting buried clear underneath the basket, sometimes pushed under the baseline, and those guys weren't always getting the ball, but you could see areas there, which again, like I'm not expecting more out of a 19-year-old necessarily in those specific settings. I did think, like what you said, that defensively he held his head above water better than I was expecting him to. Especially late in the game against Denver. Hunter Tyson was going at him. Like, out of almost every action, he was going at him. Like, coming off of a stagger, trying to walk him into the post, going off of curls, being used as the screener, kind of like what Jason Tatum was doing against the Pacers. And Johnny walled up against some of those. He held his own. I will say there was quite a bit of shrink around him. Typically, it was like, okay, I'm Quenton Jackson, and I'm shrinking off the corner, and I'm Kendall Brown, and I'm shrinking to elbows and blocks. And that was helping him out in ways that I don't think at the NBA level you can shrink quite that much to protect him when he's getting hunted. But he, walking away from Summer League, I'm more impressed by him defensively than I expected to be, is the way that I would put it.
I am too, and I think that's in part because everyone who talked about it, and they're right, they're not being mean, but everyone's like, yeah, he's got to get stronger. You know, like, and he does, and he knows it. Like, he committed to Kansas last summer. Like, his pro career has been pretty short, but that's kind of why I thought that in moments like that, when someone like Hunter Tyson is just like, oh, I'm going at that guy, like he was just going to get knocked over or look like a pool noodle, and he didn't. He did a better job than I thought, which was good. Positionally sound, that's great. So good feel, good start to me to Summer League, and the dunks were surprising. We have to train you, Caitlin. Look, I get it. Obi Toppin's on the Pacers. It's an easy 100 dunk, 103 comp. But Victor Wembanyama's right there, and that makes a way cooler sounding comp for Johnny Furphy to say he's going to.
Chet Holmgren and Victor were the only other two players in the NBA who did that last year, Tony. So, I mean, Obi Toppin, Chet, and Wendy are all the same player. So
Furphy, Rookie of the Year candidate this year is what you're telling me after.
They'll likely both have the same rim protection skills as those two guys, too.
I can't imagine anything else. Yeah, not a ton of like even off the dribble reps for Furphy to get any feel for kind of like what that might look like.
That's because he doesn't dare doing it often, Tony. Well, when Tristan Newton got the 3 turnovers in a row in the third quarter against Minnesota's extended ball pressure, Furphy had that. That was another point. Like the Pacers didn't get enough from their ball handlers, and they didn't have enough ball handlers because there's times where like, hey, Tristan Newton's getting face guarded, and now Furphy has to bring the ball up the floor. Like that's not ideal.
Yes, I was going. Yes, that end of third quarter stretch against Minnesota where they were like teetering right to get back in the game, and then was it 4 turnovers in a row, or was it missed turnover, whatever? It was horrible.
It was 3 turnovers in 53 seconds and a technical foul. It was a brutal stretch.
So deflating. Summer League.
This team did commit the most turnovers of any team at Summer League. So
I am not at all surprised. Not at all surprised to hear that. But I will say, if he got like a small advantage with a shot fake or with a bad closeout, he did see some space. Like it wasn't like he just immediately gave it up or looked for a different 3 relocating. So I will be curious. I imagine he's going to be assigned to the Indiana Mad Ants. I don't know how frequently, probably a good amount this year. What that looks like. Can he actually react to a closeout, forcing him off the line and make a play inside the arc, as we talked about with a few players on our player season recaps? Because If he can get up, like one of the most, I need to find the article Nylon Calculus wrote a few years ago about the stats from Summer League that are most predictive and least predictive. But I believe 3-point attempt rate was first, like the most predictive stat from Summer League. Like if he can get them up and finish them, he did not finish them, but if he can get them up, that's great for the Pacers. What can you do now off of that, or what can you do when that is taken away from you, especially at the pro level with bigger players? That is where I'll be the most curious about with him, because again, the framework of what he can do is there. What's next? What more can you do? You're only 19. I have a lot of questions, and yet still was encouraged by what he did.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the volume standpoint, some of that's connected to Ben Sheppard, I believe, probably got more 3-point attempts as a rookie at Summer League than what he got in the 2 games here. Yep. And that was because they were, especially after Andrew and Ben weren't playing anymore, they were running a lot of specific sets for shooters. Furphy was being plugged more into those, like especially the ones where it's like a wide pin at the top at the same time as an exit screen in the corner. They were running Furphy off of those much more than they were running Ben Sheppard. My guess is because, they wanted to learn more about Furphy than what they already know about Ben Sheppard at this point. So that, and then in transition, he got a number of attempts there. I don't think he converted a lot of those, but that's where some of it was coming. And that's where he really excelled at Kansas more than about anything, was especially his conversion rate in transition, although that didn't necessarily completely show up here.
Are you prepared for hashtag free Furf coming your way this season?
Well, with how many young players are on this roster, Tony, it could be anybody's guess how many free this guy hashtags are going to be trending.
It's not going to be fun. Although he did, to his credit, play well. Let's go to Sam Froling. Just kidding. We're not talking about Sam Froling today. Let's go to Quenton Jackson, who I feel bad for Quenton Jackson. Can I tell you why? Because everybody has a first impression of a player, and nobody watched Quenton Jackson at all last year. If Quenton Jackson's 5 games in a row were flipped, everybody would have been like, awesome. He had a great summer league. Instead, his first game was probably the worst individual performance by one player on the Pacers in summer league. And then he's only 2 misses in the next 3 games, or shot clock buzzer beaters. And then the 5th game, he was awesome. It's kind of a strange summer league for him in that I knew, and we knew, and the Pacers knew, and everybody who's watched him in the G League ever knew that he could get by guys and get to the rim and do something there. He can't really pass. He's not a point guard. And that was very obvious, especially in that first game with the turnover amount he hit. Like his stats ended up looking really good, but he still finished with 3 turnovers per game, despite having a much more limited role after those first 2 games. So the stuff we knew Quenton Jackson was good at, he did awesome at. The stuff we knew Quenton Jackson wasn't very good at, he did not do well at. I will say it was the 5th game. It was the only one that this happened, but he did show me some defensive stuff on the ball with his hands. But in general, I would think that he did well. He finished plays, I would say, slightly above what I expected from Quenton Jackson in summer league, but that first game was just such like an anchor in your brain about what he did.
Yeah, I mean, 2 things. He had the highest effective field goal percentage of anybody on this summer league roster, north of 70%. So, I mean, he definitely was finishing plays. He didn't shoot all that bad from 3, 5 of 11 from 3 by comparison to what he did with the Mad Ants. The 9 first turnovers were definitely a eyesore, but I think he only had 6 in the other 4 games combined. So the interesting thing about the 9 turnovers too was that like it was just kind of sloppy mistakes. Like it wasn't necessarily like I'm making the wrong read. It's like I threw some really bad hit-ahead passes that had no chance of being completed. Some of it was even in secondary spots, to be honest. Like he was a spot-up guy, made the wrong type of pass, more so than it was like I'm running the pick and roll and I didn't recognize where the help was and I threw interceptions. So I'm with you. I don't think he's a point guard, but not as much of it was coming from the quote-unquote point guarding as might have been expected. I would rather see him, because he does have such a degree of athleticism, doing more as a slasher, off of cuts. He's a good cutter. Standing in the dunker spot, he's impressive with his ability to finish plays from there, and the Pacers definitely like to invert their spacing with guards there. So I honestly don't think he's that bad of a fit for the way that the Pacers G League team or the Pacers main club want to play. And from the defensive standpoint, he was the best player on the roster at applying full court pressure. Yeah. And that showed up at times for the Pacers too. It's like, hey, if the Pacers are up 30 points over the Atlanta Hawks in the season finale and Quenton Jackson comes in and he's willing to pick up full court with how devoted the Pacers are to that tactic, that sticks out in your head. It's like, you don't have to be doing that right now, but he was doing it. And there was times where he turned the ball multiple times against the Phoenix Suns. That kind of turned the tide of that game a little bit, because that's when they started ratcheting up what they were doing as a team defensively. So I probably wasn't as low on him as I think the consensus was.
I think everybody just was because of the first game. That's why I think
Yeah.
that I mentioned the game order flipping. He was their best player in their last game, was totally fine in the middle, and the middle ones matter differently because Jarace was playing, so his ball handling load was different. And then in the fifth game, he had the ball quite often. I will say this: you mentioned his fit. He is technically restricted. Like, does he make sense to you as a two-way player for the Pacers?
Potentially, yeah.
One more break here, guys, so we can talk about the great people over at FanDuel. I love sports. If you're listening, you love sports. We love them so much. We never want the sports to stop, but the playoffs have wound down in the NBA and the NHL. The WNBA is on the Olympic break. We get fewer games in sports this summer, and the sports aren't sportsing like we all want. But let me tell you, the Olympics, baseball, FanDuel lets you keep all those sports and more going whenever you want. All you have to do, open the app and dream up bets anytime that you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. You just hop on over there. There's something for everybody every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer on FanDuel with a daily booster bonus, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
I mean, if I had to ask you as an archetype, like if you're just thinking about the way the Pacers play and the things that they ask from their players, who makes more sense, Quenton or Oscar?
Probably Quenton Jackson. Yes.
Probably Quenton, though I could see that you might think that having Oscar on your G League team could have value for the roster holistically, if that makes sense, or if you really got in a bind. He did do some nice things beyond what we had seen or what I had seen in G League games this year, but I just think that if you had to plug somebody in, it would be easier to do so with Quenton and continue to watch what he's doing and monitor it.
We'll do Oscar next. I will say, too, it's tricky because pretend, I don't know if this is the case, but pretend Quenton and Oscar are fighting for one two-way spot, and the 49th to 50th picks have the other ones. Like Tristan Newton's a guard, Quenton Jackson's a guard, or Enrique Freeman's a big, Oscar Tshiebwe's a big. Like, you're doubling up somewhere. So your thinking is either who helps your G League club more or who can help the Pacers if called upon more. And that's why that question matters quite a bit, because I don't know that you're so excited about, Tristan Newton or Enrique Freeman playing NBA minutes at all this season. Like, their two-way guys barely played last year, and they were really healthy, which is why. But that matters in this discussion. And I would think Quenton Jackson's ahead a little bit right now, but obviously things could change. It could be neither of them. Who knows?
And they all four of those guys, like Tristan Newton ideally is going to be somebody who plays on ball, and he has a lot more that he needs to show on ball. Yeah. Like developmentally to get to that place, he's a little bit further behind than what Quenton is as an off-ball guard. And likewise, like if you needed to plug in a big, I think it's almost going to be easier to do it with Enrique Freeman than it is Oscar, because he provides more defensive versatility than Oscar does.
He can move. I'm excited to talk about him with you. But we'll go to Oscar first as we continue thematically here. Caitlin, Oscar Tshiebwe took 4 dribbles in a row, got to the rim, and finished 2 days ago. He also made a jumper in 4 different games and had some beautiful high-low passing with Jarace Walker. I bring that stuff up to say I was curious what new stuff he would do, because he was very much rebound around the basket last year and did not defend very well. That said, he did not defend very well in Summer League either, even though he still dominated the glass. So I think it's good for him and his career that he did show some new stuff, right? Like, and added a bit of passing. That's something Pargo mentioned before Summer League about the way his game has added. He mentioned passing right there. I do think it matters that his range was more than 4 or 5 feet. I still think a lot of the same weaknesses that make him not a clear NBA player despite being a dominant rebounder were very obvious still in these games.
Yeah, the passing was definitely a fun addition. And I think that in part, when Jarace looked better attacking the switches is when Oscar was on the floor, because they're like running that little C play where Jarace comes up and sets a touch screen for the ball handler. And if they get a switch, then he'll immediately go to the block. The ball gets reversed to Oscar at the elbow. Oscar throws the high-low pass. Oscar's touch on those passes and getting the ball to areas where Jarace could find an advantage was quite good in the first game against Brooklyn, to the point where after halftime, they started having that big playing off of Oscar and daring Oscar to shoot. And that's when Oscar threw the self alley-oop off of the glass and got his own rebound and put it back. Like, I don't know how often that's going to work. So it would be dependent on him being able to hit those jump shots to a degree for some of that to show up. But he was the best big. I'm not counting Jarace as a big in this conversation. He was the best passer from the center position on the roster. And that did, like I said, it made what Jarace does in some of those plays show up more because he was out there. But to your point about what you said about, did he show enough defensively? I think it's pretty telling that in the consolation game against Cleveland, he played 3 minutes and 20 seconds in the fourth quarter and got taken out with 1:30 to play because he was being put into action so much and they were playing against the spread lineup in Cleveland.
He only closed once, right? The first game?
Yeah, the first game against Brooklyn. Otherwise, he played 3 minutes and 31 seconds in the fourth quarter against Denver, 2 minutes and 14 seconds in the fourth quarter against Phoenix, and 4 minutes and 34 seconds against Minnesota. Enrique was in the closing lineup at the 5 position in every game except the one against Brooklyn. So that's kind of telling enough on its own, and I know that it's really easy to be like, hey, he's a monster rebounder, which he is. As far as leaving his rebounding area, his gift and knack for understanding angles, his pursuit and the motor that he consistently plays with is special. It really is. But in order for that to show up, you have to get stops. And the Summer League team got stops in some of these games at an okay clip. The Pacers last year still ranked in the bottom 5 in first chance defense. So if he can't help you impact getting stops, then his number one trait doesn't show up as much. You have to be able to force the miss first in order for him to get the rebound. So he really does still struggle against spread lineups to the point where like he can't get out against the 5. And then if he has a contest, he doesn't typically leave the free throw line area. And then it's just a short closeout and he just kind of throws both hands up. And that's why they were leaning a lot more towards Enrique in those situations than they were Oscar.
I do think if they're considering him for a 2A again, which the fact that they've made him a restricted free agent means they are, him showing new skills or something different matters, right? Yeah. Like, okay, he's making progress. He's getting better. That's good. But it's the same kind of question I just had with Quenton Jackson, where it's like, okay, Enrique Freeman's also there. They just picked him. And then at the guard spots, there's like TJ, Drew, Ty, Ben Mathurin's going to handle the ball. Now Newton potentially on a 2-way. Like, what roles are for Quenton Jackson? Well, the same things at center, right? Like, already they just signed Wiseman, first of all. And then Obi plays up sometimes, and maybe Enrique Freeman's playing up sometimes because he did in Summer League. So it's like, there's no real role or minutes for either. So it's either your, oh gosh, we have 6 injuries guy, or it's more about the Mad Ants and helping that team. And that team's going to have a pretty clean slate heading into next year. So adding skills matters for helping the Mad Ants. And we saw he was one of the best players in the G League last year. He was in the All-Star game. But Quenton Jackson was also very good for the Mad Ants last year. So it was hard to come to a conclusion on if they have to pick one, what the spot would be. But I, like you, think Quinn would be the answer in terms of fit and what he does right now.
Yeah, because another point to bring up is that the majority of his offense that he sources is either on putbacks or in the dunker spot. And again, he and Jarace had good chemistry there because Jarace is great at throwing those shovel passes to the dunker spot. I wish we could see him do more of that out of the short roll, but alas, Oscar does not do much as the screener. He does not do much as the roll man, and the Pacers like to run a lot of pick and roll. So even on the offensive end of the floor, it's not the cleanest fit necessarily.
He doesn't make enough contact on the screens, and because he's so excited to be in the paint and roll, right? Like it's so hard to be patient for young players. I feel like in those settings when they're younger, their size means that forever the guard is like afraid of the screen, is looking at him the whole time, so they can just dive whenever they want and create space. Where in the pros, that's not the case, right? So the contact part is really important. What second round pick would you like to talk about first, Kalen?
Well, first I got to ask you that when you saw him dribble behind his back in the consolation game, and when you saw him get the steal and punch the ball ahead with a left-right cross to get back to the rim, was part of you thinking like, point Oscar's the answer here?
I couldn't believe I had a lot of Oscar notes in that game that was like, what is happening? This is all working. He's making the shots. He's handling. The one where he took it from the perimeter to the rim and finished, I was like, whoa, where's this guy been? That was something.
But to the second round picks.
I love second. Which one would you like to do first?
Let's
pick
do
order?
Tristan.
Okay.
Let's do Tristan.
Okay. Sorry. I'm sorry. I don't know where to really start here because Tristan Newton's stats are bad from Summer League. He shot 20%.
One stat was very good. Do you want to start with the one stat that was very, very good?
You know what? Yes, let's do that.
He had 28 free throw attempts, Tony.
Yes.
And he shot 25 of 28 on those free throw attempts. The guy can draw contact.
He he in the last game went 3 for 9, which is terrible, and had 17 points on 9 shots. Like a very good game, despite shooting that poorly. Well, that's funny when you said the good stat. I forgot about free throws for like half a second. I was like, well, oh yeah. But the thing I thought you might be heading to is he did have some nice like, oh, I'm surrounded, and make a good pass, but he also had a lot of, oh, I'm surrounded turnovers too. So it was a very peculiar thing for him where in college he proudly, and Dan Hurley proudly, and UConn proudly boasted all the time that he played 2 different roles the 2 seasons there. One team was very much more free-flowing offense, play through the post and have success that one. The other team got up a lot more threes, and Tristan Newton could run both systems and play very well in those ways. He's a very adaptable player, and they draft this guy who averaged 15, 6, and 6, and that's awesome. He can kind of do a little bit of everything. Then it's something like he kind of did a lot of not anything, right? He couldn't make anything. He shot 20% from the field, like I said, 18.2% from 3, 4.6 assists is fine, but almost 3 turnovers a game. The rebounding, I got it, but it just the actual finishing of plays that weren't free throw related left a lot to be desired from him, even though he did have some nice passes in traffic to me that at least hit my note sheet every game.
Yeah, I mean, in order to get to the free throw attempts, he did very well that if he saw an under against the pick and roll, he would reject that screen and seek contact when the guy was trying to beat him to his spot. He's very good knack for that. Same with the handoffs. If the person went under the initial handoff, he'd get the quick rescreen from Oscar, Enrique, whoever it was. When he'd get to the other side, he'd seek the contact with the guy on his hip, decelerate, draw contact. Being able to get to the line is a definite skill, and he has it. I will give him credit for that. Like you said, the jump shot is pretty far from where it needs to be. And I think his handle against pressure is even pretty far from where it needs to be, honestly. Like he does pretty well in that he'll angle his body to sell no-look like hit-ahead passes, and you could see that at UConn as well. But like in the Minnesota game, when Minnesota was really ramping up that pressure, like we talked about, that's where the turnovers were coming from, to the point where, now Johnny Furphy has to bring the ball up the floor. Like, I don't think that's really the ideal. And he, like Jarace at the point of attack when he was running the pick and roll, had trouble reading the low man. He was throwing a skip pass to the corner when the tagger was staying at home, and he was trying to jam pocket passes when the tagger was tagging. Like, it was the opposite of what the read needed to be a lot of times. And I wondered about that because, everybody talks about Dan Hurley's offense, and UConn's playbook is ridiculous. Very, very good. And this is what I wrote in my preview about it, is that Tristan benefited at times from it's just an empty side pick and roll, and he made like this great hook pass, and that's going to translate, right? And it's like, then when you look closer at the play, it's like, okay, but it was preceded by a UCLA cut that made the big have to sag off. And when the big had to sag off, then the player came off a Novak screen at the other side that removed that tagger. So he never had to read them. And like the Pacers obviously have a great offense, a very high-powered offense, and they can, like, as I've mentioned many times, Rick and Mike Weinar can be fire with the clipboard when they need to be, but they really do aim to play more out of concepts. And, some of that was read-based from UConn, but they were also doing a lot of things that made those reads easier that aren't going to be the case in Summer League. You're not running anything that nuanced in Summer League action. So when Tristan had to just process on the fly, it showed up that he, as far as the Pacers wanting to play very fast early in the shot clock and doing things out of simple actions where you kind of complicate the simple and can make a lot of different reads from there, he struggled in those areas.
What I'm hearing is Dan Hurley, Indiana Mad Ants head coach.
Yep.
I'm sure the Mad Ants have a $75 million budget. They can lob at Dan Hurley to be their head coach next year. To me, a telltale sign of guys who are not reading the low man correctly or afraid they're going to make the wrong read is they give up the pass too early. Right? They don't take the space or make the defender make a decision or move in some way. And so he did draw contact. Sometimes he would just keep it, but when he would get to the elbow, he'd give it up or try to hit the corner too quick. And that doesn't do a lot. It doesn't keep the advantage in the way that the pick actually does.
He also really, really tested my jump passes are good now t-shirt. He's really going to test that theorem. The shirt is blue and yellow because Tyrese's unique skill set makes jump passes good, but Tristan Newton will probably bring my sales down a bit because he's leaving his feet in a lot of situations where you wouldn't want to.
So the archetype of what Tristan Newton could be, I get it, right? Like tall creators are good. And if the shot ever is a thing, like I hate when this happens to me, where one play is just seared in my brain. I believe it was against the Nuggets where he took 2 dribbles to the right around a pick and roll, just rose up and drilled a 3. I'm like,
Right.
where has that been the whole summer league? Like, can we do more of that? And so I get the framework of why they picked him and what he could be, but I did not think he played very well in summer league. That is my end theory here.
And in part, that's why Jarace didn't play as well in summer league, to be quite honest, because they weren't getting enough out of Tristan and Quenton as, like I said, initiators at the point of attack out of the pick and roll. That was making Jarace having to do more of that, especially once Ben Sheppard wasn't playing and he was playing up at the 2 guard spot. So, yeah.
Well,
there was a trickle down effect.
It was. One pick later, Caitlin, the Max star Enrique Freeman, who threw up in his workout for the Zips and still made the team and was on an academic scholarship, and that story's all cool. And the cooler part was that he was good in almost every game that he played for the Pacers team in summer league. I told you before this, I've said this on the show many times. To me, compared to expectations, the best player in summer league. He exceeded them pretty much every time he hit the floor. Some of that was just hustle. Some of that was legitimately successful play, finishing around the rim, shot over 60% from the field in these games, hit 2 threes, a 4-point play. Did not see that coming at all from Enrique Freeman at the NBA level. Like, I don't know that I buy he's going to be a shooter, but he found ways to get him up. Good rebounder as a hustle perspective, good defensively sound positioning and effort to stay with guys a lot of times. Didn't make a lot of mistakes despite trying to do a lot of stuff. Really impressive start to an NBA path from Enrique Freeman.
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly, like, I made my video about him and said that he plays big by doing the little things. Most of the things that he does, you're not going to look at a box score. I thought he was arguably their most critical player in the game that they won, and he only had 5 points and was like, what, 2 of 6, 2 of 8 from the field? I don't have that number in front of me, but it wasn't coming from a scoring standpoint. It was the fact that, like I mentioned, and what we talked about with Oscar, when it came time to close games, they were playing with Enrique Freeman at the 5, and they were able to switch. And they were able to switch without having to require as much shrink behind him. And that was something that I wondered, because you could see in his games at Akron that he had very good defensive feel. I would compare him somewhat similarly to Andrew, and that he can somewhat break from scheme without compromising the scheme. He notices places to peel. He notices places to next that not everybody has that type of recognition, and he had it. But there was times where it was like, okay, but could he do that if it was, somebody with more range, a pull-up threat? Would he be able to switch and switch back in that scenario if it was at the NBA level? And he did okay with some of that. Like, it wasn't always perfect. There were times in the first game where I thought some of his pick and roll coverages got a little bit confused, but it was also his very first game. And I told you this at a time. I honestly thought that Enrique, as a rookie, which obviously he's an older rookie, but is further along in his summer league defensively than what Isaiah Jackson was as a rookie when he played in his first summer league. In terms of being able to play different types of coverages, I was encouraged that they could have him do that. He was communicating veers to the on-ball defender, that he was, I mean, they need more defensive versatility. They need guys who can play multiple coverages, and he did some of that. So I was most encouraged by what he did there. And because there was also just like little nuances where like, it's like, I wonder if that's an Akron thing, or if I wonder if he just has that much attention to detail, because he was like very good at using weak hand contests. Against any right-handed shooter, you would notice that he was very cognizant of like, I'm going to close out with my left and be contesting that shooting pocket, and it had an effect there. His footwork was pretty decent. Like, he could use a drop step and then still close with his left at the rim. So those types of things I thought were all encouraging.
Yeah, so he did some very few, I think, pre-draft workouts in 2023, which matters because he said all his feedback then was, you got to be a more modern big if you're going to be in the NBA. And you can see like little things, like he upped his 3-point attempt rate at Akron that year. But the thing that still stands out to me thinking about that is like the 6'9" kid was like, okay, I'm going to be a center. And you can really see that how much his wingspan allows that to happen with some of the stuff you're talking about. Like, he can disrupt plays from pretty far away, and his footwork's good. So even at not gigantic size, he can play like a 5 and play bigger than his height because of his wingspan, because of his discipline. And I think he did very well to become a more modern big that last season in basically every way. And now the 6'9" kid can be a center. And he turns 24 in a couple days, but if this is a 5 who is mobile and can do some stuff not right around the basket and can defend not just right at the basket, and is a good rebounder, like that is a very intriguing player to me, even if it's the 50th pick and is older, and we'll see if it ever amounts to anything. But I liked his summer league. I liked the framework of what this player is. I don't know what it will ever be with or for the Pacers, but I liked it. I liked Enrique Freeman.
Yeah, because, I mean, offensively, there were some things there, too, because I talked about how most of what Oscar gets is the dunker spot or putbacks, and Enrique was like, hey, I can do a 2-dribble move with my left hand. I can pick and pop once or twice. Yeah. I can dive out of the roll. Like, I can set a ball screen, then go slip a pin down, so basically veer action, get to the rim, and have a lob play from Tristan Newton. Those types of things where his roll pacing was a little bit better. Like, there's just little flashes of like, hey, maybe there's more things that he can do, which again, by like, I'm not saying right now, right here, that Enrique is going to leapfrog Isaiah automatically or that he's better right now than Isaiah. I'm just saying that when Isaiah was a rookie at Summer League, there weren't as many things offensively that he could quite do yet either. And you could still see that defensively, he had to find his positioning. That was going to be a process. And the Pacers as a whole have had success these last 2 years in draft classes, taking, you know, the older rookies who have, you know, who find their way on the floor with their defensive feel, right? Like that's how Andrew got on the floor. That's how Ben Sheppard got on the floor when they have a little bit more experience. So I did notice there were some times offensively where you would hear Pargo having to direct him as far as like if somebody else was the screener, like where he needed to go stand in relation to that. Like his spacing shaping up around the actions wasn't always what you wanted, where he was getting told like, you know, get out, space to here. But overall, like you said, like relative to expectations, I liked his summer league quite a lot. I like the things that we got, and I think it's intriguing. And I think him on a 2-way contract makes a ton of sense to see continue what he does at the G League level next year, and hope that he continues to make strides. As far as like him starting at the 4 and then finishing games at the 5, I would like to see what him at the 5 looks like if he's playing with somebody a little bit more imposing inside, because these matchups didn't really, there weren't people that were getting fed underneath the basket against him that much.
That's a good point. And great news for me in media. Great interview. Very smiley. Move over Ben Sheppard. We have a new smiley rookie.
And he's kind of plays like big Ben Sheppard.
Ironically, yes. Low mistake kind of guy. All right. One more in the Pacers orbit. Kendall Brown, Caitlin. This was a big summer league for Kendall Brown going into year 3, non-guaranteed contract until opening night. What can he show? Hey, look at this first game. Beating some guys off the dribble, getting to the line, 9 free throws, I believe, in that game, like creating some contact. And the rest of the games, I think he had one pretty productive half against Phoenix, but not a great summer league for Kendall Brown. 41.5% shooting, 20% from deep, more turnovers than assists, not dominant on the glass, not dominant on defense. I did like that we saw some sort of functional use for his athleticism in terms of getting past one guy with his handle. But if he had any sort of traffic, he couldn't do anything with it. So I just don't think he showed enough to be confident if you're the Pacers that he should be part of your team next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most telling sequence for me was in the game against Minnesota on back-to-back plays, caught the ball in the exact same spot. First play, he has yards of space to shoot, and he pushes off his back foot and steps out of bounds because he doesn't want to shoot the ball, and he's going to try to drive. Next possession down the floor, he catches it there. The guy's right beside him, and he shoots a guarded 3, and it's an air ball. There was too many times where the pull-up jump shot, particularly going to his left, was hitting nothing. Like, it wasn't just a miss. It was a bad miss. 3 of 17 on jump shots, 17.6%. Didn't shoot the ball well at the G League level last year. A stat that I will throw at you, Tony. In the last 5 years on NBA Finals rosters, there have been 2 players who have shot fewer than 4 3-point attempts per 36 minutes while shooting below 30% from 3. The only 2 players in 5 years who have done that, Maxi Kleber this year, who was ramping back up from an injury, and Derrick Jones Jr., who no longer plays on the Dallas Mavericks, which Derrick Jones Jr., if he had stayed, like the utility there for him defensively, like he's at least providing something, even though the Celtics were blatantly ignoring him anytime he was above the break. Kendall Brown, to me, just as an archetype, he doesn't make sense to me. Like this type of a player doesn't exist the deeper you get into the playoffs. And obviously you're not signing Kendall Brown to necessarily be a core member of your playoff rotation, But in part, like, isn't that part of your roster building? You're trying to find guys who could be part of your future and what you're building towards. And the defense is just not undeniable enough to outweigh what some of the offense is. And I just think that speaks to a broader point that I would like to make, that a lot of times deeper in the playoffs, you'll find a way to keep shooters on the floor who might be defensive liabilities. You'll do some pre-switching. You might do switch to blitz. Teams are a lot less lenient in finding ways to keep, the non-shooting athletic wings on the floor. It's harder to do it. And that's currently what Kendall Brown is. And I'd be more intrigued if I felt like he had like a dominant defensive summer league, and he really didn't. So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is like, even if Derrick Jones Jr. is like the dream, the defense isn't at that level yet. Like, there were like a few flashes along the way these last 2 years, but not again in this summer league, or enough to even think that that's something coming as well. Like, I get the idea. Okay, let's draft this athletic guy and see if we can get any ball skills out of him. And that's why every time he had an okay drive, I thought, okay, what happened there? Why did that work? But nothing was there in terms of that kind of functional stuff where it's like, oh, the speed and athleticism is so great. I found it very telling that the fifth game against the Cavs, the NBA TV game, the announcers who have not watched him a ton were like, oh, this guy has one speed. Like, very quickly they identified that out of him, and so this was a key time for him, I think, career-wise, this summer league and probably this training camp, although I'll probably talk about that later this week. But this wasn't enough, I think, for him to show a firm, like, yeah, I should be on the team when the first game comes.
Yeah, because the other problem is it's like, if he's not going to be a shooter, what else can you do? And there were times where he was playing at the 5, and it was times when I would have liked to see Jarace being used as a screener and Kendall Brown's being used as a screener. That same C action to get Jarace the switches. Kendall Brown would go set it, and he'd stand behind the switch. Like, instead of trying to seal like Jarace was, potentially catch a pass from Oscar, he wasn't doing anything in those situations. And then also, like, just anytime he had to take more than 2 dribbles with his left hand, again, it's like gripping the seat. Like, what is about to happen? Like, the right to left cross is very loose when he has to do much with the left, in addition to the pull up 2 to the left. So, yeah, I would be surprised if he's holding a roster spot for the Pacers next year.
I think he'll be in camp, because why not? It's completely non-guaranteed, but I agree with you there. I'm going to use gripping the seat. I've always been, there's a Reddit subreddit called this. It's called No, 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 Yes. That's what I've always used. Lance Stevenson had a lot of shots that I would categorize as no, 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 yes shots. I think gripping the seat is a better phrase. Any other Kendall Brown thoughts?
No, I think that sums up my Kendall Brown experience.
Do you have any other player that you want to talk about at all from this team? I would say, hey, he played in the NBA before, was the only rotation player when they were trying. Dakota Mathias can really shoot it. That guy is a good shooter. He's probably too old for consideration at this stage because he's 29, even though he's 2A eligible. But I was like, yeah, I get it. This is a cool player.
There was times where he was steadying. He plugs into their movement shooter actions well enough. He could take a 1 dribble pull up when he got run off the line out of some of those movement shooting actions. So it was intriguing. He was there. I don't think that he'll be sticking around, but
yeah, no one did enough to get into the mix, right, for anything, which was telling enough. So I don't know if there's any other players you don't have anyone else you want to
if I brought up anybody else, I probably wouldn't be saying anything good. So
wow, that is brutal. Well, you missed this. How will you remember this summer? Like, fondly, not fondly?
I will remember it somewhat more fondly than the TJ Leaf, Aaron Holiday 5 for 25 Aaron Holiday performances where they had no role man on the roster because of Goga's passport issue where he couldn't come and play. So Aaron had no one to run pick and roll with, and it was just like him getting off as many shots as he could. Alizé, the only big. TJ Leaf struggling to handle passes at the elbows and do any type of facilitation at all. That was a rough go. This was not that rough. However, like, I don't think either of us were surprised to learn that they led every summer league team in turnovers. That was fairly predictable.
Alarming. The lack of creation is kind of like an undercurrent that has to be baked into like every single thing you talk about with evaluation of these players. Is it do a lot, but that in a way that's helpful and hurtful, right? Like, you couldn't see guys attacking already tilted or cracked defenses, but what can you do in that situation, right? Like, that still is kind of helpful in a way.
Yeah, on that standpoint, Jarace, you and I talked about in the player reviews that I was like, I hope they continue to keep a wide scope of what he develops into rather than trying to develop him into the only spot that he can play. We saw him play offensively every spot from pretty much 1 to 4. Defensively, he did a little bit in almost every spot. And that revealed things that he can't do and things that he can do. Like, I liked watching him stand at the wing, and when somebody else is running the pick and roll and Enrique's rolling and he's throwing gator passes, perfect on time, on target as a connector from that area, and he's able to do it because somebody's guarding him because he could show that he could shoot the ball. Like, heck yeah. And I still wish we could see him do a little bit more as the screener. We got to see it in the first game. Not a ton in the rest of them, but I think that Jarace showed some things that he can do and some things that he can't do in a way that should be meaningful for the Pacers moving forward. That being said, hopefully we learn more about him during preseason when he's playing around, as we've said many times, to me, the deepest point guard rotation in the NBA. So I think that would have helped him here, and I think that'll help him there.
Agreed. And now the focus shifts to the Olympics. Kaylin also having fun watching Canada play awesome games ahead of the Olympics. USA plays in about 2 hours and 45 minutes, and then it's all Olympic hoops until the WNBA returns for me. So exciting times. Can I make a pitch to you? It's not Summer League related, just for 2 seconds. Can we do the NBA with the NBA length free throw line, but FIBA rules? I want that NBA. I love FIBA rules. I love the way the game is played. I hate the shorter 3-point line, though. That's my pitch for the NBA.
Can we have the 10-minute quarters too?
Yeah, I'm in. Yes.
And the better flow of the game, less commercial breaks,
commercials, shorter timeouts. And the timeouts are awesome because they always get the camera right above it. You can hear what they're saying.
Did you watch the France-Canada game on YouTube the other day when Ronnie Turioff was the guy talking?
I did hear that, yes.
He was translating everything the French coach said.
That's what I was about to say. In the Puerto Rico game, I liked it because you got to hear the Puerto Rican coach talk, and then you got to hear their English translator tell the players who didn't speak Spanish what he just said. But it was different because he was all passionate and mad when he was speaking in Spanish, and the English guy would just say it normal. I love it. They did one. You watch that game. They cut to one Canada timeout, and Jordi Fernandez dropped like 4 F-bombs. They're like, "We don't have this feed. Sorry." It was so funny. I love that. But yes, FIBA games are a delight. They're awesome, and it I don't know. It just feels more balanced. I hope there's a way the NBA can take some notes from these. That's my international rant.
Go Olympics.
Go Olympics. I hope we get a USA Canada game at some point in the bracket for the Pacers fun. Kaylin, thank you for the time. We have survived another Summer League of Vegas Heat. Where can people find you and your work of Heat covering the Pacers? That did not work as well.
I took some pictures of my own Summer League that people can go check out. At C2_Cooper is my handle on X. If you go there, the link to my Patreon, patreon.com/basketballshewrote is where you'll find all of my work.
All of it in one place. Tomorrow here, I'm going to talk about what summer we hinted at a lot of this stuff here today, Kaylin, but what Summer League and those performances meant for the back end of the roster, right? What considerations there are now, including James Johnson showing up at Summer League. What does that mean for the back end of the roster and one of those potentially 2 available roster spots? And then we'll pivot into more deep off-season stuff after that. And Olympic coverage, Kaylin, as always, thank you for the time. We might not chat for a while now because there's not a lot of games to talk about. So enjoy your summer. Have some popsicles, play some hoops, make the most of it.
Anytime.
Back to soon, everybody. Thank you for listening. Take care.